Sweeping through the heart of Europe, the Danube is one of the world's most historic and romantic rivers. But now, with the expansion of the European Union into Eastern Europe, it's at the heart of a very modern dilemma. How to create prosperity through trade and development without destroying the environment. This is the story of how the Danube has become a new battleground in the conflicts between the EU's transport and agriculture lobbies and environmentalists fighting to preserve the river's unique ecology. Can the EU uphold its own commitment to environmental sustainability?
People have been present in the Danube Delta since at least the time of the ancient Greeks. Communities have come here, settled, moved away, and generally speaking, they have left no trace of themselves when they've gone. We're now on the edge of a very important time, perhaps an unprecedented occasion in the whole of Europe, that is the extension of the European Union. Many people in these countries have very, very high expectations. They expect the European Union to arrive and change things like a fairy godmother, whereas maybe for the environment of the Danube it could be an evil ogre.
The Danube is Western Europe's longest river. It runs nearly 2,800 kilometres from its source in the Black Forest in Germany to the Black Sea. It is the world's most international river, connecting 18 countries. The Danube and its tributaries comprise a river basin that covers 1/10 of continental Europe. Because of Strauss's waltz, the Danube is forever associated with the beauty and grandeur of Vienna. But the Danube isn't blue, and this isn't Vienna. This is Vienna.
Danube was seen as something of a threat to people from Vienna. And in fact, they built a canal to take the Danube round the back of Vienna because they were afraid of it. It was something that brought them floods, diseases, pestilence, didn't look very good at that time, and they preferred that it wasn't around.
But it's not just the Viennese who have ambivalent feelings about the Danube. As Europe's main artery, it's always provided a vital transport link between Eastern and Western Europe. But to make it navigable, the river has had to be tamed.
The Danube was, in historical times, a river where, in this part of the river, it was in a number of braids, sort of smaller channels. As a consequence of the interest in shipping on the Danube was increasingly constricted and built into concrete channel. The idea being that the ships had a secure, safe way to go, and this part of the river in particular is one where, as you fly over here, you can look down and see that it's a straight construction with concrete banks on both sides.
Over the last 30 years, the European Union has actively encouraged both the expansion of river transport and intensive farming methods. Now, with Brussels' power in the ascendant, and as the EU expands into Eastern Europe, the threat to rivers on the continent is set to increase.
The transport issue has become very prominent in the discussions about the expansion of the European Union to the countries of the East. There is a trans-European transport policy that has been developed that sees the Danube and other waterways as simply waterways for transport, not as rivers, but as transport highways.
The EU Transport Network Plan envisages an integrated system of roads, railways, canals and rivers. The Danube, with the Rhine, is central to this plan to link the North Sea to the Black Sea.
The European Community wants in the first place to shift transport of goods from the road to other modes of transport, and so in particular to modes that are environment friendly. In the first place inland waterways, but also rail, and we are very much convinced that making better use of the inland waterways is a contribution to further economic integration in Europe.
The Danube has been dammed and channeled for navigation for centuries. There are already 58 dams between its source and Vienna, But the EU's transport policy would lead, eventually, to the whole length of the river being changed and adapted for navigation. In Germany today, there's only one short stretch which survives as a natural, free-flowing river. But this part of the river is too shallow for today's huge, fully loaded barges, so the European Union want to deepen it and dam it.
The first thing we have to do is to make physical changes and adaptation to the river. In the section Vilshofen-Straubing, the plan is to make sure the river is deeper. Today the river is only 2 meters deep, something like, even a little bit less even. So we want at least to ensure that there is 2 meters 50 throughout the year, so that fully loaded inland waterway vessel can pass through the section. Mainly that is what we want to do everywhere. 2.50 meters, to have it everywhere on the Danube.
Ensuring a minimum depth of 2.5 meters along the whole length of the Danube is the EU's long-term plan. But before they can turn their attention to the river downstream in Eastern Europe, they've got to ensure the canalisation of this stretch of the river in Bavaria. And some local people and conservationists have joined forces to protest.
Ship transport is always reported to be environment friendly. That is only true if you don't spoil the environment by destructive building measures. This Bavarian Danube has only 1/3 of the water that you can see in Austria. You would have to dam it to really fulfill the desires of the big lobbies for huge ships. There seems to be a compulsory process that if you dam one river, you create an erosive process downstream, and you have to build the next dam to stop erosion, then you have to build the next dam to stop erosion, and suddenly you have no river at all.
Plans to deepen the Danube through the wetlands east of Vienna have provoked fierce arguments between local environmentalists and the transport lobby. If the EU is successful in its canalisation plans in Bavaria, this Austrian stretch will be the next of the so-called river bottlenecks to be straightened out.
A month ago, everything you see here would be flooded. And this is because the Morava River is still a natural river that can flood the floodplains. And that is one of the reasons of the high biodiversity here. The storks are not breeding by accident here, they're just coming in. They're breeding here because their feeding grounds are so good, in good status here. If you would channelize that river, or dam that river, or whatever, yeah, that would be the end here.
Canalising this stretch of the river will have a dramatic impact on the wetlands. But 20 years ago, the Austrian government's plans were much more radical.
And in those days, the Austrian government, wanted to build a hydropower plant right here in the floodplains. But thousands of people demonstrated in December 1984 against this dam. They wanted to, keep these floodplains as they are. And the police were coming here, trying to get rid of all the demonstrators. But there was one crucial date, it was the 19th December, where the police tried to push the demonstrators out. They hit a few people. And within hours, there were 40,000 people on the streets in Vienna. It was totally clear, we don't want you to build this hydropower plant. And 12 years later, in 1996, the national park was established. And the national park goes from Vienna, which is about 30 kilometers upstream from here, until the border with the Slovakian Republic. So all the floodplain forest, the meadows and the oxbows, the water, the Danube itself, are part of the national park now. Even when we have the national park, and one can think, well, when we have a national park, everything is all right, yeah, but it isn't. Now another attack comes. The dams are gone, but now comes the navigation problems. Yeah? In order to improve the conditions for shipping, they want to deepen the river here. The river in this section here is about 2.2 meters deep. And now what Austria is going to do is to deepen the river up to 2.8 meters. That doesn't sound that much, but in order to achieve that, they have to dig a lot, and that concentration of water means that we have less water for the floodplains here. So it's a kind of a competition between navigation and the ecosystem here.
And it won't stop at the Austrian border.
Ist es notwendig, dass nicht nur in Österreich, sondern auch in Ungarn.
It is necessary that a draft of 2.5 to 2.8 meters is provided, not only in Austria, but also in Hungary, and definitely in Romania, where there are also bottlenecks. Then it would be possible to make shipping on the river economical all year round.
Wirtschaftlich und ökonomisch betrieben werden.
But there are other solutions to the shipping problem.
Historically, the thinking was to manage the river and to change the river to fit the transport needs. The basic challenge that exists is to get the boats to fit the river and not to try and adjust the river to fit the boats.
But canalisation isn't the only threat to the Danube. The legacy of communism, combined with the EU's own common agricultural policy, are now threatening the quality of the water itself. Until the end of the 19th century, the Danube was, for the most part, a free-flowing, meandering river with a varied landscape of gorges and wide floodplains. Constant regulation since has reduced much of the river to a barren chain of dams linked by canals. According to a UN report, this has led to the destruction of more than 80% of the Danube's wetlands. Just across the border from Austria, the Gacikovo Canal and Dam is the biggest hydroelectric project on the upper Danube. First conceived by the communist governments of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, the project was eventually completed by the Slovaks in 1992, after the post-communist Hungarian government pulled out. This is all that's left of the mighty Danube now, as it flows from Slovakia into Hungary.
The building of dams along the river essentially means that the river itself, the water is going through the main channel, and it doesn't get then into the floodplain area where waters would naturally go. Floodplain forests are the most productive habitats. In fact, they're equivalent to rainforests because they're constantly receiving nutrients, they're in water, and are extremely productive habitats. And when they are not getting that water, they are becoming less productive and less able to sustain the type of life that would exist there.
If you dam a river, you have to cut off the wetlands from the river system. And then you will see that the groundwater on both sides is stagnating, putrefying, losing oxygen, and completely unusable for drinking purposes. Now the groundwater under the wetlands is the best drinking water of the lowlands, with no nitrates, no pesticides. But if you make a stagnating subterranean swamp out of the groundwater, it will deteriorate and you will lose a large potential of drinking water.
The Millennium Development Goals are extremely important to the European Union, and they have to do with the right of access to clean drinking water, with an increasing shortage of water, with more and more of our groundwaters being polluted. We will see more and more conflicts over water if we cannot create access to clean drinking water for all those who need it and who lack it today.
In 1991, during the war following the breakup of Yugoslavia, this wetland area on the Croatian side of the Danube was occupied by the Yugoslav army. It was from here that they shelled the city of Osijek. After reconciliation in 1995, the national park of Kopački Rit was returned to Croatian control. But much of the park is still a no-go zone because of the minefields laid in the war. Ironically, these may actually help protect the wildlife here. It's an area of floodplain typical of what may be lost if the EU transport policy goes ahead.
Kopački Rit as a nature park has been protected since 1967. It's famous in Europe. Ornithologists from all over the world have really heard about it. But the tourism is just starting to develop now because the after the Homeland War, which finished in 1995 with the peaceful reintegration of this area, people have started to come back into this area, and we're trying to find ways to make a living here. So one of the ways to make a living here is ecotourism. There are a couple of functions that wetlands fulfill and that are very important. One of them is that they serve as a natural flood defense. When the waters are really high and they tend to overflow their banks, it's the wetlands that serve as sponges and then retain all the water. And as the water is retained in the wetlands, it also gets purified, because all the soil particles and all the things that come with the water and are inside it get left behind on roots of the plants and so on. So it purifies water as well, and we get really good drinking water from wetlands.
This unique water purification process is critical not just to the welfare of the Danube, but to the health of all the people who depend on it. Almost all Hungary's population depends on the Danube and its tributaries for drinking water. And yet large cities like Hungary's capital Budapest have limited sewage treatment plants and discharge huge amounts of human and industrial waste directly into the river. And in Belgrade, it's no better.
Actually, Danube is big sewer because from whole Yugoslavia, municipal waste and some of industrial waste has been released in Danube without any kind of treatment. There are no wastewater treatment plants along Danube River. Particularly serious issues are city of Belgrade and city of Novi Sad, which are rather big cities, and municipal wastewaters are discharged without any previous treatment. We don't consider this as a big deal because, as to my best knowledge, cities of Milano in Italy and Brussels in Belgium also didn't solve their wastewater treatment problems. However, we cannot say that water quality in Danube River is poor, because it's a huge water body and the self-purification capacity of that river is extremely significant.
But it's this self-purification capacity that's now jeopardised as the wetlands are destroyed by new locks and dams which interrupt the river's flow and trap pollution. Downstream from Belgrade, the Danube plunges into the Iron Gates Gorge, forming the border between Romania and Serbia in the former Yugoslavia. In the 1960s, the two communist regimes cooperated in the construction of the Iron Gates dams to provide hydroelectric power. These dams effectively cut the river in two.
More serious problem than municipal wastewater is industrial waste and agricultural waste. Particularly dangerous it is in the case of reservoirs. Here we are talking about Iron Gate Reservoir, and the nutrients being discharged into Danube. We hate to say that, but it is trap for pollution coming from Yugoslavia. Due to the dam and impoundment of water, flow velocities are reduced, pollution settles at the bottom of the river. As a consequence, we have rather good quality, except at the very bottom, where we have pretty bad quality, and the sludge at the bottom, some people say, is environmental time bomb.
For decades now, the EU's Common Agricultural Policy has subsidised intensive farming methods and the use of herbicides, pesticides and fertilisers. These chemicals break down very slowly. If they're released into the Danube upriver in Germany and Austria, they will eventually find their way into the waters downstream. But there are alternative ways.
In 1986, my husband wanted to find a new way to run the farm, and so he was very interested in the organic idea, even more because he had problems with his health when he had to use lots of fertilizer, mineral fertilizers and all these stuff that is necessary for very modern and high producing agriculture. Well, we are now at the ditch. This is a natural frontier between the fields of our farm that are organic farms and the fields of our neighbor who is not organic farms. You see the difference exactly now, the colors. We have a light green color in our wheat, he has a dark green color. You see the plants, they're not so high. He has very high and strong wheat plants. You see also that we have weeds inside. He has got not one single weed inside. And so this is the consequence of the farm production of organic way. We don't use fertilizer, we don't use pesticides or mineral fertilizers. The farm next door is increasing with all his production. It's also increasing with the input of the agrochemistry. In comparison with our fields, a very heavy or very strong rain may even bring a very strong emission of phosphates and chemistry into the ditch, and that's what goes along the rivers down to the Danube.
The ditches, streams and rivers which flow into the Danube to form the Danube River Basin cover 1/10 of the landmass of continental Europe and provide drinking water to a large part of its population.
Nobody can deny that the common agricultural policy with, I would say, excessive subsidies as it is designed also have created a lot of problems, environmental problems, and including the nitrates problem. It is important, of course, to reform the common agricultural policy in such a way that we do not invite the new member states to repeat the mistakes made by the old member states, so to say. And of course, they have an advantage in that they have not been using so much of pesticides or fertilizers, and they have not had a very intensive agricultural sector. I hope we can keep that at a good level, and that they integrate also the environmental aspect into the necessary reforming of their agricultural sector.
The countries of the Danube, and particularly the downstream countries, are at our crossroads at the moment with respect to the development opportunities. There has been a reduction of the use of fertilizers and pesticides in the country simply because the money's not there to use them. The chance is there that they could convert those agriculture to more biological, less intensive methods, or the pressures that are existing are to intensify the agriculture, and the Common Agricultural Policy is promoting a more intensive agriculture that will potentially expand the use of fertilizers, pesticides, that would have a negative consequence for the Danube.
Control of nutrient is very important aspect of water quality control at Danube River. However, a certain amount of nutrients is definitely being discharged into this country coming from Hungary, and also we are discharging certain amount of nutrients downstream from Yugoslavia. Yeah, endpoint of all nutrients is the Danube Delta, which is a fantastic natural resort, and I believe that that's a good reason for efforts to keep nutrients under control.
As the EU expands its agricultural and transport policies into Eastern Europe, environmentalists and scientists are increasingly concerned for the health of the Danube, all the way downstream to the Delta and the Black Sea.
4 more Danube countries have joined the European Union. And for 2007, another 2 are supposed to be joining. That means that most of the Danube's agriculture will suddenly find itself subject to European Union directives. This is a double-edged sword. The reason is that, on one hand, European environmental legislation is extremely helpful in improving the status of our water. On the other hand, the introduction of the Common Agricultural Policy, if it isn't done extremely carefully, will increase the amount of the intensity of farming the amount of fertilizers that are applied, particularly in the lower Danube countries, and this will present an enormous burden on the Danube yet again. This is the river's kidney. This is the place where a lot of the things that come down the river can be cleaned up. It's the last chance for the river to clean itself before it flows into the Black Sea. And being such a beautiful place, everybody, I think, will agree that it has to be preserved, not just for its function, but for humanity.
We shouldn't see developed countries as having triumphed over all the problems of development. Many of the Eastern European countries are abjectly poor, and they will also need European assistance.